What's going wrong in churches in America? We've got some stats and discussion coming up next on the Church Revitalization Podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
Welcome to the Church Revitalization Podcast. My name is Scott Ball. I'm joined by my friend and co-host, AJ Matthew. AJ, in real time, as we are recording this, it's kind of been a hot minute since we've recorded a podcast. I know that, if you've just been listening week after week, you might think.
But it's been a few weeks. Mm-hmm.
It's been a few weeks. So, yeah, I feel like we're brushing off the rust and the cobwebs here as we get back into the saddle and recording our podcast. And this is a great topic to do it on.
It is. It's been a little while also since we've talked about the things going on in what is termed post-Christian America. It's a felt issue, and we're gonna kind of peel back and look at some interesting things today. Probably for a lot of you, I think some alarming stats. Yeah.
I think a couple of things at play here. One, I think it's really easy, and we'll talk more about this as we get further into the episode, deeper into the episode. But at the top, I just want to say, I think it's easy as pastors and church leaders in particular to not see the scope of the problem very well, because we're in a particular bubble. And so we think everything's fine, or it's not that bad. Or we just look at what's going on in television and go, well, it's not that bad. Like you're seeing in a really negative extreme. And so what's missed is just how muddy and messy and wrong the worldview is among so-called Christians or self-identified Christians. And so we're just not even seeing the problem clearly, because we're in our own bubble and we're comparing our bubble to what we see on television, and we don't realize that there's a whole big moat in the middle that's really messy. And that's where the majority of the problem is, and it's also where the majority of the people are. And so we want to maybe give some language to that, what's actually happening in that middle. And I think it might surprise you. It surprised me.
Yeah, it surprised me too. I'm thinking, you might have to define exactly how big is that bubble that we think, we're in, or our audience is in. As a pastor or church leader, it could be your bubble is very small. It might only include you and your closest top leaders, because if you expand that bubble out to include your entire church, then you might find some of these statistics, and you're going to have to expand your bubble a little bit to address the issues.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so all of that, I guess, as prologue. One of the questions I wanted to ask just before we get started in describing kind of the challenges as they are, we were talking about this off air. Do you think churches are a symptom of a degrading culture, or do you think that they have played some sort of active role in the degrading of culture? Are they just a symptom of the disease, or are they a cause of the disease?
Yeah. You actually want me to answer that?
Yeah, I'm curious what your opinion is.
Rhetorical.
I think it's a complex question, and it's obviously multivariate. Like it's not the only symptom, nor would it be the only cause. But I'm just curious.
Right. Yeah, personally, I think it's both. I think we have churches that are contributing to bad theology, bad worldview. Churches contributing to bad worldviews, either by bad theology or maybe the lack of good theology, not necessarily intentional, although I think there is also some bad theology that isn't then intentionally taught, maybe with good intentions, that contributes to the decline of a biblical worldview and morality. So, churches are not off the hook.
No, and we'll get to this again kind of towards the end of the episode, but I think that churches can also be the solution. If they kind of get their heads screwed on straight as to what they ought to be doing.
Yeah. I think the church is the only solution, actually.
Oh, yeah, agreed.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's you said we maybe need to first define the scope of the problem. So I thought maybe I'd start with this. This isn't in our notes, AJ, but I'm looking at this chart here. By the way, all of this research that we're using today comes from the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University, which is a research center that is run by George Barna. So you may not even know this, listener, but Barna sold Barna Research many years ago. So any data you see that comes out from Barna doesn't actually have any connection to the man Barna anymore. He runs the Cultural Research Center at Arizona Christian University. So he's still very much in the research business, so to speak, but he's doing it at ACU. So just wanted to be clear where all these stats are coming from, and we'll include links in the show notes today at malphursgroup.com/201 if you want to kind of go down the rabbit hole too. But according to him, according to this research, the number of self-identified Christians in the United States is still really high. It's 69% of adults in the United States. So you might think that's not very post-Christian. There you go. Well, if 176 million adults in this country are self-identified as Christians, then is it really post-Christian? And I think the problem is not the self-identification that they call them. It's that they're calling themselves Christian. And then when you kind of go below the surface, there's a huge gap.
The devil is literally in the details.
Right. Exactly. So let's maybe start with that group, AJ. This would be this is a large group that entertains a wide range of perspectives that really are not in harmony in any way with biblical teachings. So let's see. 72% of self-identified Christians argue that people are basically good. And let's maybe start with this one. This is a challenging one because this is ultimately a theological question, right? Are people essentially good, or are they essentially bad? And I don't know. I guess if we're to pick apart this survey, right? Maybe if you were being generous, you might say, well, people are trying to be nice, I guess.
Yeah. So sure. What do we actually believe? What does our theology tell us about this? Me and Scott, you and I both believe that humans are all born inherently with a sin nature, with a proclivity towards evil, and only by the grace of God, even non-believers, I think, through the common grace of God, can do good things. And the Bible even tells us bad people can do good things. But I think, in the lowest part of our humanity is a sin nature that tends towards evil, or can be swayed towards evil. So I don't know. I don't think I would have answered that question the same way.
Oh no, definitely not. But you and I are in the, as we will find out here today, the very small percentage of people who have a biblical worldview.
Yeah. So again, this group of respondents to survey is under the title self-identified born again Christians.
No. Right now I'm just looking at self-identified Christians. We'll look at the born again.
So this is another interesting thing that we see this break down into like these categories of where people fell. And I think 20, 30 years ago, we would have seen fewer categories. But what we see, I don't know if this is intentional by Barna and his team, we're finding more granular groups of people now, I think, to show, okay, there's still some hope because there's a few people that truly are aligned with the things of God, and titles that people used to have that we would all lump ourselves into. Now we're finding, okay, we want to separate ourselves from this other group of people and their beliefs.
Yeah, maybe I'll just pause. And so here are the 5 categories that Barna uses. He self-identified Christians, which is the broadest category. Someone who just say, "Oh yeah, I'm a Christian." Self-identified born-again Christians, someone who then would say, "Oh yeah, I've been born again." Self-identified evangelical Christians, which again, born again and evangelical used to be synonymous. They're not anymore. And then Barna gets into where you would have to say he's putting his own definitions on things. Theologically born again Christians, which would be people whose actual theology aligns with what we would have considered a born again Christian, I guess 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And then the strictest category, integrated disciples. These are people who both live and act out of a biblical worldview. So they not only know sort of the right answers to questions from a biblical worldview perspective, but are trying to integrate that into their lives. So he's created these 5 categories. So the broadest one that I've just been sharing some data from, these are self-identified Christians. And that's the biggest percentage of adults, 176 million, or 69% of U.S. adults. So just a couple other kind of highlights from this. Let's see, 64% of these people, self-identified Christians, say that all religious faiths are of equal value. So Christian or Muslim or Hindu, it's all good. It's all the same. And 52%, so a majority of Christians in this country claim that determining moral truth is up to each individual. There are no moral absolutes that apply to everyone all the time.
And then we all go, okay, no wonder the world looks like it does.
Yeah, where even the Christians say, who can know?
Yeah,
who can know what's right and what's wrong?
Oh my gosh, this is so frustrating.
Yeah, and you know what? I again, I'm going to be generous here and say, if the thought is some things are morally ambiguous, that's true, right? Like there are things in this world that are harder to know the right thing from the wrong thing, but that's not what the statement is. The statement is there are no moral absolutes that apply to everyone, and that's obviously false. Or I mean, true. That's obviously. Hold on. No, there clearly are moral absolutes that apply to everyone. Let me say that.
Yes.
I'm trying to be as clear as I can. I don't want to get that reversed. If you're saying some things are harder, like are ethically gray, sure. How you answered the question to your wife, do I look good in this dress? You know, right? that might be ethically gray. But should you cheat on your spouse? That's not a hard one to answer. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm trying to be generous here, AJ.
Okay.
How people may have responded.
Yeah. All right.
But okay. All right. So that's self-identified Christians. These are people who, you know, call themselves Christian, but they don't have a very biblical worldview. So how does that translate down to, let's look at born again Christians? These are people who, I mean, they're using born again language, right?
I know. Yeah.
So you would think you got to be getting closer, right?
You would think.
All right. So 61% of these folks say that all religious faiths are of equal value. That's just a 3% difference. It's like just 3% fewer than the broader category. And this is maybe the most troubling. 60%, AJ, of born again Christians. Now, a born again Christian, you think this is a person who has said, I have to be born again in order to have a relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
That's like the literal definition of a born again Christian. But 60% of self-identified born again Christians believe that if a person is good enough or does enough good things, they can earn their way into heaven, which is
unbelievable.
Categorically the opposite of being born again.
Yeah.
Right?
Wow, man. Yeah.
So I don't know. What are your thoughts? And 65% of them say there's no absolute moral truth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, again, maybe giving some huge benefit of the doubt to changes in the use of language, which has rapidly increased in the last even 5 to 10 years, how words don't mean what they used to. And, things that used to be specific now become broad terms. So I don't know. People are saying yes to something. They don't really understand what they're saying yes to, as far as like, are you a born again Christian? Because I get maybe I'm even saying this in defense of such offensiveness to my own theology, that people would believe this way, would say, I'm a new creation in Christ. Yeah. He's just he's cool. He's good. Lots of other things are good too. And I'm gonna do my best, and boy, heaven's gonna be nice. I mean, come on, this is alarming.
It is alarming, and I think it even kind of goes back to, I think, well, not kind of, it does go back to the very beginning, in the garden, right? It's an attack on the language. That's the enemy's attack. Did God really say that if you eat of the fruit, you will surely die? Right? Like, and so there's an attack on the language, there's an attack on God's character, there's an attack on absolute moral truth, there's an attack on all of these things, and it's the same trick, just repackaged for a new day, but the trick is the same. And I think what's most troubling, is that we're talking about, AJ, most of our churches.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, to me, the real sticking point, is that I think we make a lot of assumptions that in our churches, these views are not there. That everybody who's sitting in our pews has a biblical worldview, or at least maybe not the new people, but the people who are there every week.
Right.
Their worldview is good.
Yeah.
I just don't know you can make that assumption.
I think you can't anymore. And this is, this is interesting, because this is the space that we work in, Scott, and we're in front of teams of leaders all the time, trying to get them to accept the fact that the teaching that they bring on any given Sunday might be landing on ears that have never heard it before. Encouraging gospel presentations and making the faith clear and understandable. And we talk to them about doing that for non-believers, or people very new to the faith. I don't even know if that's a qualifier anymore. Now it needs to be, hey, make sure this is simple and clear for everybody, because even the people that are leaving, going out for coffee and maybe telling somebody that they're a quote unquote born again Christian, apparently don't have a clue what that even means, or what comes with that, what they're supposed to believe in order to have that identifier. And this is messed up, man.
Yeah, I had an interesting conversation. I won't say the name of the church, but I was talking with a church just yesterday. I was having a coaching meeting. And one of the things that they do, and I think a lot of churches do this, but one of the things that I appreciate that they do is they still, even though they're a larger church, they're not a mega church, but they're growing and they're a larger church. They still do one-on-one conversations with anyone who wants to become a member about their salvation. To ask them, like, what is it, not just do you say you are a Christian, but like, how do you know that? Like, what does that mean? And he said, you would be shocked. And based on these numbers, I don't think I would be anymore, at the number of people who, when you just go a little bit below the surface, they're not, they really don't know what that means. Like, they don't really have a grasp on the gospel.
Yeah.
And so, he's like, it's the most evangelistic thing that we do. Effective evangelism strategy we have is people who want to come to be in members and already think they're believers, and realizing that there's a big gap in their understanding of what the gospel is. Just things that we would consider basic.
Yeah.
They're missing those chunks.
Yeah. I mean, I guess maybe that's a sort of a first line of defense for the church, to make sure that the people that are there really understand the truth. I mean, not that that would be a gotcha thing, but that we would understand, that we would know, hey, this person, they don't have a good understanding. They think they do, which is even maybe the most dangerous place to be. That we can correct that, and we can teach as a part of maybe becoming a member. I mean, I attend what would be considered a mega church, a multi-site, over 5,000 member church. And my wife and I both had a one-on-one. This was back during COVID. We had a one-on-one Zoom with elders in our church to talk through these things before becoming members. So there's no excuse for the church of 250 not to have a close conversation, a really in-depth conversation with somebody wanting to join the church.
Yeah, and we've got to start catching these things. We'll talk more about that here in just a second. But so some other quick numbers I think are worth just mentioning real fast. So I had mentioned that. Let me bring it back up. So 69% of Americans, adults, are self-identified Christians. That's 176 million. When you get to people who self-identify as born again, that's 35%. So we have a big drop off from being Christian to being self-identified as born again to 89 million, or 35%. But the views don't change all that much. The worldview is very similar between someone who calls himself born again and someone who just calls themselves a Christian. But the percentage of people that Barna estimates actually possess a worldview. This is that sort of highest, strictest application, what he calls an integrated disciple, someone who possesses a worldview and is not perfectly, but to the best of their ability, trying to live out that worldview. What percentage do you think that is, AJ? I don't know. You maybe already know. We may have.
I saw it earlier, and I know what was it, like 6%, 9%, something like that?
6%. 6%.
Wow.
So in our country of 320 million people, something like that, there are 15 million adults who fall into that category of a person who has an integrated worldview, biblical worldview. Now, the numbers are just slightly better. If you someone who is a theological born again Christian, that's his category for a person who kind of knows at least knows all the right answers. Has a biblical worldview, but isn't necessarily applying it, like just kind of cognitively at least knows the boxes. And that's 28%. So about a third, or almost a third.
So 71. Here you go. Here's an exercise, listener. If you're not driving, if you're where you can do this, grab your calculator, put your average weekly attendance in there and multiply that by 6% and look at that number. How well do you think that number jives with your personal experience for the people in your church that are maybe inviting people, telling you about folks that they know that have been saved, the people that they're praying for? I just, on a church of 400, that's 24 people. That, to me, is starting to sound kind of accurate, Scott. In our experience dealing with churches, your church of 200, 6%, that's 12 people. Those probably are the 12 people that come to mind when you're thinking, like, who do I know in the church that could really sink their teeth into this, or they would really be helpful for this? And you're like, I can think of about 12 people out of my 200 congregation. There you go. Now we know what to call them. What's the title for them, Scott? What are they? What's Barna called them?
Integrated disciples, I think is what he called them.
Yeah. 6% of America, folks. Wow.
6%. Now, to clarify on the theological born-again Christians, these are people who would have a proper understanding of what salvation is. That Jesus died for them, and that it's not works-based salvation and that sort of thing. And so that's a slightly more encouraging number. It's at 28%. And so there's a day and age where we would have just said, that's what a Christian is.
Yeah. Right. Yep.
But just based on their perspective. So, all right. So what I want to do is I want to transition here now. We've described the problem, I think, thoroughly. Barna has this great quote I want to share. He says, "It's one thing for Americans to be confused on the finer points or even hotly debated elements of theology. But for Americans to misunderstand or to flat out reject the Bible as a foundational source of truth and moral guidance, to reject salvation by grace alone, and to reject core doctrines of the Christian faith points to a major crisis in our society."
Yep.
And I think that is, I don't think I could have said it any better.
Yeah. That's a good
summary.
I
think what you and I were trying to do at the beginning is kind of give some benefit of the doubts that maybe some Americans are just confused on the questions. That maybe there's just a misunderstanding, and that if you probe a little deeper, they'd have a slightly better view. But I think when you look at it in total, there's no amount of you being generous that can cover over the gap here.
That's right. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So let's talk about the cause. Why is this happening? And let's just talk about the church. I think we could talk ad nauseum about the culture and the way the culture is contributing to this problem. But I think that the church is contributing to the problem. And I think there are two key components for why the church is adding to this. So let's start with this first one, AJ. Which is a lack of leadership.
Yeah, lack of leadership. Which there's several elements to that. But yeah, I mean, we are certainly of the philosophy that leadership in the church is central to health or unhealth in the church, dysfunction or thriving. So yeah, first of all, leaders don't confront false teaching. Maybe even before that, Scott, I would say leaders are ignorant that false teaching exists.
Well, that's my second. That's the second point there.
Oh, it is. Sorry, I wasn't looking ahead. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, leaders are not aware of false teaching. Yeah. So
okay, let's start with that one then. Leaders
because aware. That would be the first level. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
So I mean, we encounter churches all the time that do not monitor, don't care to monitor, don't feel like they have the time to monitor what is being taught in small groups and Sunday school classes and whatever other discipleship environments there might be. And that's a problem. That is a problem. That, I think, contributes to people that just are going through life thinking they are something that they are not. And that is a true follower of Christ and one who may even hopefully be saved. So we have to stop doing that.
I think that part of this problem is a problem of again, just this bubble. So you're only close to a certain number of people in your church, and maybe it's those 12, that 6% that you really have a close relationship with, or even that broader 28% who maybe aren't super serious about their faith, but can answer the questions rightly when asked. And so that's 90% of your experience is with that 28% of people.
Yeah.
And so you don't see that there is a problem because your bubble is self-constructed. So there's just a lack of awareness. Not that false teaching doesn't exist. It exists, but you don't see it within your own church because your experience is the majority of your experiences with that 28% of people.
Yeah, that's probably a fair hypothesis and a good benefit of the doubt, hopefully, to.
No, I mean, I do think that's true. I mean, I would say the majority of pastors that we're working with, they're just not seeing it in their day-to-day work. The other thing I would want to point out is Paul and all of the apostles this is the thing they were the most concerned about.
Yeah.
Throughout the whole book of Acts, all of the epistles are about guard against false teaching.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, I don't know that we take it that seriously. That we're like, it's okay. We can course correct a little bit, or
Yeah.
everyone's got their own little views on this, and
Mm-hmm.
let's major in the majors and let's not major in the minors. And I agree with that sentiment, but sometimes we make the majors minors.
Yeah. Well, I think, even the term false teacher has become, it's very harsh, in our modern kind Christianity. It's a harsh word that we reserve for the likes of Joel Osteen, Scott, or Creflo Dollar, TV evangelists.
I don't want to yuck your yum. And
so if we restrict the title of false teaching to TV evangelists, well-known TV people that we see flying around the world in their private jets, then we have then been deceived. And Satan is doing his work. Like, okay, yeah, y'all focus on those few. You focus on the handful, and I'll get my fingers all over your church, and I'll do my work there. So yeah, I think, not that we need to be dragging people up to the pulpit on Sunday and false teachers.
Well, I do think there is a semantics thing there where we go, where we think I don't want to call someone a false teacher. I think there's also a sense of humility. Like, if you're going to call someone a false teacher, you are opening yourself up to examination and going, well, let's take a look at all the things you've ever said. And people are afraid of that, rightly so. I mean, the Bible addresses all of this and says, hey, you're going to be held to a higher standard. You should expect greater scrutiny. And therefore, don't be in a rush to become a teacher, because you're going to be subjected to greater scrutiny.
I think a fair, kind of point of application here is, it's also, okay, I'll shamelessly plug Leadership Pipeline Development that we at the Malphurs Group can take your church through. But, yes, it's totally understandable that you, senior pastor, you cannot know everybody. You can't get into that depth of relationship with them and know everything that's happening, that every word that everybody says in your church. But having a structure of leadership in your church in which good theology goes down level by level in the appropriate atmosphere, in the appropriate venues of teaching, that is within your control, that you can develop and make sure that, you can then you have influence over the understanding and the teaching for, your handful of people, who can then pass that on to their handful of people, and so on. I mean, we call that leadership pipeline. And that's how we can begin to root this out and correct. And of course, then, Scott, as we also, teach and instruct, there's then healthy and right ways of correcting people in their understanding and teaching well and with kindness and grace. And, not just going to extremes on things. But so there's a way to structure our churches that we can begin to correct these bad statistics.
Yeah. One other aspect of this lack of leadership, or leadership problem, that I don't want to skip over, but I don't want to harp on it too much, is this idea that leaders themselves are propagating the false teaching, which we've just been talking about. But I'm not just talking about Sunday school teachers in your church. I'm talking about pastors. Now, I would assume that if you're listening to this podcast, you are very unlikely to be in that percentage of people who is propagating false teaching. I don't think that the Church Revitalization Podcast is probably like high on the charts of people who lack a biblical worldview. But just to give some overall numbers, and AJ, you had not looked at these. At these. Okay, so what percentage of Christian pastors would you guess possesses a biblical worldview? Let's start first with just out of all Christian pastors. Then we can go into some specifics on denominational families.
Oh, we have similar. Oh, now don't make me go into specific.
I'll give you the denominational family, and then you can guess the percentage. How about
that? Okay, well, that's still okay. So people are going to be like, golly, AJ, definitely down on our.
Let's just start with all Christian pastors. What percentage?
That's very broad, and I'm going to have to pull from some of these bad statistics that we've seen against Christians, because that they're not getting that from nowhere. So okay, all Christians, pastors of the whole world. I'm going to shoot low and say 65%.
You didn't shoot low enough.
Really?
37%.
No way. 37% of people who say they're a Christian pastor hold a biblical, what we would call a biblical worldview.
Yes.
Okay. I guess we're starting to discern the issue. All right. Wow.
Okay. Now, if you're a non-denominational independent church, you are the most likely to have a biblical worldview.
Okay.
And I think that this is going to probably include Southern Baptist churches who would be considered independent.
Okay.
So this is non-denominational, independent, versus evangelical Protestant, which I think does not include
more mainline. It includes more mainline churches.
Actually, evangelical Protestant might also include Southern Baptists. I'd have to look. I'd have to go deeper here and look at that.
So, are you taking us to the highest number?
The highest, and we'll go to the lowest. Yeah.
Okay. The highest. Okay. Non-denominational evangelical
church.
Gotcha.
No. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. The high watermark, 78%.
57%.
Ah, you're killing me. People. 57?
Have a biblical worldview.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Seriously.
Yeah. Evangelical Protestant. That's next.
Evangelical Protestant, general evangelical. The non-denominational evangelical church was at 57. All right. So we're going to go down to, let's drop 10%, 47%.
Okay. A little better than that, 51%.
Okay. We broke half.
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Okay.
It gets worse.
I'm sure.
I'll just run through these so we don't have to go take so much time. For the charismatic Pentecostal denominational families, 37%. For mainline Protestants, it's 32%.
We're talking pastors. We're talking the leaders.
I'm talking about the pastors,
chief teachers. This is mind-blowing and heartbreaking, Scott.
The holiness denominations, 28% have a biblical worldview. Traditionally Black Protestant, 9%. And Roman Catholic, 6%. So now here's something interesting.
This is also Barna. This is Barna.
This is the same
thing that we were looking
George
at.
Barna, not
Barna
Research,
not the Barna organization. Yeah.
And then last, this is, I think, interesting. You're actually more likely to encounter a church with a biblical worldview on a percentage basis for if the church is under 250 than if it's larger. The larger the church is, the pastor is less likely.
Oh, wow. Across all categories?
Across all categories.
That's interesting. Nothing is jumping out in my mind.
The lowest category is churches between 250 and 600, but it's almost tied statistically with those that are 600 or more. You're most likely to have a pastor with a biblical worldview in a church of 100 to 250.
What is that jumping out? Is there any reason for that jumping out at you? I'm having trouble comprehending why that would be.
There are some notes in here on that. I feel like I probably should read them before I make any assumptions. But I think it has something to do a little bit with you can't give out of what you don't have yourself. So if the basis for your worldview is the culture and not scripture, and I don't know for whatever reason. Also Baptist churches, this was in here somewhere, Southern Baptist churches statistically, like in isolation, are the most likely, most consistent to have a biblical worldview, and that's like 78%.
And they're also statistically going to be smaller. Yeah.
And they're also statistically going to be in that 100 to 250 category. So the net, you wouldn't call it smaller. I know lots of people I now like to call it just normative, like a normal size church.
Yeah. That's actually true.
I mean, just based on like, you're not going to have a church of 5,000 people in rural Nebraska. Like that's just not.
Oh yeah. But still, why are pastors of larger churches less likely to have a biblical worldview? You think they're just because they're swayed by the size of the congregation, more reflects the culture and has like this negative influence back to the pastor?
Yeah. In fact, I've had this theory. I can't remember who I was talking to. I was having this discussion with someone recently, and I don't want to name any names. I don't want to get myself in hot water. Some well-known pastors have recently espoused some views that are almost openly antagonistic towards the Bible.
Yeah.
Well, and I'm my hypothesis on this, having been recently spent a few days in the city where this person pastors. You are so surrounded by a particular kind of culture and worldview. It would be very difficult not to be impacted by that. And again, I think this is why scripture talks so much about do not be swayed by the world. I mean, because in the first century, you're even more the minority. It's even easier to be swayed by the world and the culture. And I think that's happening. I think it's happening to these large church pastors that are in these large population centers. They're absolutely being influenced by the politics of their community, by the cultural influences in their community, and this, I think, even maybe distorted, perverted desire to reach the city. Like, I've got to conform my teaching in order to reach the city.
Think about how many times in recent years, that somebody ends up saying, some well-known pastor, they say something and you're like, what?
Where did that come from?
I thought they were solid. And so, maybe that's it. Here it is in the statistical analysis. We're beginning to see that. Man,
I think you're just less likely to be swayed. I think if you're in a smaller church, there's less of that pressure to conform. You don't have people, when you lead a large church, you have influence.
Yeah.
And there are going to be attempts to leverage your influence, and those are going to seep into you. And I think it just makes you more vulnerable. All the more reason to be on guard. I'm not anti-big church at all.
Yeah, I mean,
at all. But I think you've got to be all the more on guard that you're not being swayed in some way that you're not noticing. And I think that those pressures are not non-existent, but smaller on a church that's in a normative size church.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Quit growing and start planting. It's going to be safer.
So, okay. Let's end this. We've been talking for a while. Let's maybe end this with some, we didn't talk about the other thing. So we talked about lack of leadership. The other is a lack of discipleship. I think that a fundamental flaw in our churches is a belief that discipleship is a program. Hey, we've got 60% of our folks are in a group or a class. Therefore, at least 60% of our people should have a biblical worldview. And I don't think you can assume that.
Yeah, you definitely can't. Not anymore.
That's not what discipleship is. Discipleship's not just being in a group or a class. I think we should use a biblical definition. It's the active process of teaching, rebuking, correcting, and training in righteousness, which, by the way, is what Paul says the Bible is useful for.
Yeah.
Right? It's instructing people in righteousness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Not just in a group or class setting, but by the way in which we live our lives and live with people.
Yes. Now we can structure groups and classes to achieve those ends. That's the way that's supposed to work. Some kind of a venue for achieving that result. But that also comes back to leadership. And as I mentioned, we've got to be training the people that are going to be teaching and instructing people rightly so that they pass that on. So, wow.
And then finally, just to kind of put a cap on this, I think that one way that we can begin to combat this is to begin rethinking what is the first place for discipleship. So I think very often we still think, because Sunday worship is our most public thing that we do, that it's still the first place for discipleship. And I think that is increasingly not the case. Increasingly, the Celebrate Recovery group that you host, or the MOPS group that you host, these things that are externally focused, that are addressing specific felt needs in your community, are not just evangelistic, but they are also first places for discipleship.
Yeah.
This weekend, I'll be speaking with a group of weekday preschool directors, and this is how I want to encourage them: that, hey, your weekday preschool might be the first place for discipleship for a whole family, not just those kids.
Yeah.
Because statistically, here, most of those parents don't have a biblical worldview. And many, many, many of them are not going to a church regularly anyway.
Yeah.
And so don't just try to disciple the kids, try to disciple the whole family.
Yeah.
And I think that's a critical aspect to us combating this, is not reserving discipleship for Sunday morning and Wednesday night, but really getting out there and leveraging those things that are on the outskirts of our community as a first place for discipleship.
Man. Okay. Well, this has been a long but really interesting episode, Scott. I guess, hey guys, in the end, remember 6%, it might be 6% of your congregation that truly has a biblical worldview is living out a life of a disciple devoted to Jesus. So our goal needs to be greater than 6%. That's where we're starting from today in 2023. Well, this has been episode 201 of the Church Revitalization Podcast. So you can get today's show notes over at malphursgroup.com/201. We'd love to have you over there. You can also go to our YouTube channel, see the video version of this week's episode. And that'd be a place you can also leave some comments down there if you've got thoughts on this, or maybe ideas on how your church is combating this dismal set of statistics that we see in the Christian church in America today. Thanks for being with us. We sure would also love to have you hit that donate button while you're on our page and contribute to the work that we're doing around the world in trying to grow churches into greater disciple makers also. Thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.